Okay, we're live.
Yay.
Hello, everybody.
Oh,
Welcome.
Hello.
So
Hello,
far,
everyone.
it says 0 viewer. Oh, there we go.
Oh,
Oh,
oh
119. Hello.
Whole bunch of comments.
my gosh. Hi, folks.
Hey,
This is so
Hi.
cool.
welcome, welcome.
Someone
Unreal.
shared this in the last few minutes that I could just go quickly reshare.
No, but I can. I can do that now.
That's a good idea.
Thanks.
Yeah, I'm
I
just gonna
thought so.
reshare to my story and say happening now.
Great.
And if you guys notice in our StreamYard window, there's a comment section. You can see all the live chat coming in.
Yeah. Look at all that goodness.
Okay, so Hadar and Mira are going to be joining us a little late. So because they're on West Coast time commuting. But we're
I mean, I'm on West Coast time, but punctuality is important to me. So different strokes.
I want to apologize to everybody. I'm really sick with the flu, and I really can't talk much without coughing. I'll probably be muting myself often to take care of my bodily noises. So, but I'm really happy that everyone's here, and it's going to be a great talk. And I'm gonna kick it over to Rin, who's gonna like start us off.
Oh.
Oh, sorry. we just got Chinese delivered, and I'm like, we're gonna have this.
Oh, no worries.
I'm sorry. What did you just say?
Were you gonna kick us off?
Yes, I was.
Okay.
I'm sorry. That
Go
was
for
very
it, go
bad
for
form
it.
on my part. Hello, everyone, and welcome to this this gathering that we've got here of people. All I want for Hanukkah is, I almost said Christmas, which is no. All I want for Hanukkah is a free Palestine. We've got some creators here, as you can see, that are a group gathering of anti-Zionist Jews, and we are a space that is, welcoming to all who are curious, whether you are Jewish, whether you ally, whether you're just kind of wanting to see what the whole thing is about. I know we have a lot of cool things planned in terms of just like education and like history and just, fostering a nice and healthy, wholesome space there. And Emma and sorry. And is there anything key that I'm missing here?
I don't think so.
All right, cool.
Sounds
I've been
pretty
emceeing a
complete
lot
to
of
me.
different events, and I just try to keep track of like who we're talking to and what this event is about. But we're happy to have you here.
Awesome. Shall we do intros? I can kick us off because I unmuted first. Hello, everyone.
Yeah. I guess I can kick us off with that. I'm thank you.
Oh.
Okay. That's my partner, John. And I am Ren. My pronouns are she, they, and I'm a creator on TikTok, Twitch, YouTube, all of that.
Cool. I'll jump in next. First of all, can everyone hear me who's like in our boxes? I think we have a little bit of audio stuff going on. Yay, yay, yay. Okay.
I can't hear.
Well, sorry, Rin. My name's Catherine Bogan, Katie Bogan. Pronouns are she, her. I'm an anti-Zionist American Jew. I currently live in Nebraska. I'm from Rhode Island. And I am a trauma therapist. I'm a PhD student out at the University of Nebraska, and I'm also a sex researcher. So I'm really excited to talk about healing and the body and how we can sort of use pleasure and joy to keep us in the movement and sort of maintain our sanity during a lot of global pain. And I'm going to popcorn to someone. I'm just going to nominate Daniel.
I accept the nomination. Thank you, Katie. My name is Daniel Mate, pronounced with an ate. I'm originally from Vancouver, Canada. I now live in Brooklyn, New York, and I'm coming to you live from Venice Beach, California, for some reason. I am a musical theater composer, lyricist, first and foremost, even though that's nowhere near what I make my living at, but that's what I carry the closest to my professional identity heart. I write music and lyrics for musicals. And I am also an author. I co-authored a book called The Myth of Normal: Trauma, Illness, and Healing in a Toxic Culture with my pops, Gabor Mate. And we're working on a second book now called Hello Again, A Fresh Start for Parents and Adult Children, which, well, who knows anything about that? And I'm a self-styled, I call myself a mental chiropractor, which is a totally made-up modality, but it's also really awesome. I take walks with people and help them get their minds unstuck. And since October 7th, I've been talking into my phone a lot and, seeing what happens. And I'll be talking later about, I guess, the mental chiropractic aspects of the tectonic shifts that are happening in a lot of people's consciousness. I went through my, post-Zionist to anti-Zionist crumbling transformation decades ago when I was a youth leader in my leftist kibbutz-oriented Zionist summer camp where I was Seth Rogen's camp counselor back in 1997. For real. I used to sit on his head to wake him up, to beat Zionist education into his head. But I'm seeing that in this time, it's a divisionary time. A lot of ground is cracking open for people, underneath people. For some people, that's exhilarating. For some people, it's terrifying. And a lot of people are just confused. And so I guess I'll be speaking about some of the cognitive, emotional aspects of adjusting to the disillusionment that the present moment is foisting upon us. And if we take it as an opportunity, furnishing us with. And I will popcorn to Jude.
Hello, can people hear me? Thumbs up if you can hear me. Awesome. Hi, my name is Jude. My pronouns are they, them. And I'm a musician and an artist, and I also work in the energy environment world as my day job, which is awesome. It's not like my day job, it's like my job, and I love it. And I also am a creator on TikTok somehow. I'm still not really sure how that happened. I recently led a chapter by chapter reading group of Ilan Pappé's 10 Myths About Israel for Jews Deconstructing Zionism, and my content is geared towards that demographic. I'm a practicing religious Jew. I'm part of a growing anti-Zionist and non-Zionist movement inside the traditional egalitarian community in Brooklyn, New York, where I live. It's awesome, it's queer, it's leftist, it's religious, it's diasporist. The most important part of being Shomer Shabbos to me is not spending money, because unplugging for Shabbos is my weekly fuck you to capitalism. So I'm happy to be here. And I was, some stuff was going on with audio. So who hasn't gone yet? I always lose my place. Isa, I always lose my place in the popcorn thing in the middle.
All good, all good. Hi, everybody. I'm Isa Segalovich. I'm Interstellar Isabella on Instagram and TikTok. And here on YouTube, I'm Ornament and Crime, which is a name I will explain maybe months from now. But don't think about it too hard for now. I'm a lot of things, but my main job is anti-authoritarian folk art history. So I do a lot of work on folk art, but also looking at the intersection of art and politics in general. I write for Hyperallergic and also have been talking a lot into my phone for a few years, but even more so for the last month or so. And yay, I get to introduce my my co-host, or my co-pilot, Pikachu.
Pikachu.
Okay, I also have cats named after Pokemon. You will see Abra and Eevee in the background at some point. Wow, Isa, so cool.
The thing is, I'm not even a Pokemon person. He came with that name, but I thought it was so perfect for him. It somehow it's the perfect name, so we kept it. So sorry to be a fake Pokemon fan, but it happens.
I have 4 cats. They're not named after Pokemon, but they are around. They're not allowed in this room right now.
I'm STEM. I have the flu. I'm what am I? I'm an author and a journalist, and I am a content creator. And I'm very happy to be here. I'm a very secular, extremely secular Jew, patrilineal Jew. And I was really disconnected from my Jewishness until I became a parent, and so like through being a parent, I just really wanted um, my kids to have the sort of history and culture and traditions that we grew up with in our extended family who were more practicing Jews. And so I've been kind of reconnecting over the last 6 years since I became a parent. So, yeah.
So we've all gone, right?
Yeah. Yeah. And Hadar and Mira should be joining us soon. They can
Got it.
introduce themselves whenever they show up.
Got it. So next up, I'm going to go ahead and light candles and do a little bit of grounding. So here is my Hanukkah. Um, I have these beautiful like ombre candles, and I could have sworn that there were 8 of them, and there are 7. So for the shamus, I have one of those like dinky ones. So it's gonna be great. But yeah, I'm gonna do the candle blessings. I'm going to be using the traditional blessing format, which is Baruch Atah Adonai Eloheinu melech haolam, which is gendered language. So if you're lighting your own Hanukkah, you can feel absolutely free to use whatever language feels most comfortable for you. Here we go. Oh, it went out already. It's these cheap ones. There we go. Baruch atah Adonai Eloheinu melech haolam asher kitshanu b'mitzvotav v'tzivanu lehadlik ner shel Chanukah. Praised are you, Adonai our God, sovereign of the universe, who has sanctified us with God's commandments and commanded us to light the Hanukkah light. Baruch atah Adonai Eloheinu melech haolam she'asa nisim lavoteinu bayamim hahem uvazman hazeh. Praised are you, Lord our God, sovereign of the universe, who accomplished miracles for our ancestors in ancient days and in our time. Now, usually we would be done at this point, and we only do a Shehechianu on the first night. Oh, this is so hard. I have an essential tremor and I can't do anything one-handed. So you would usually only do a Shehechianu on the first night, but you also can do a Shehechianu anytime that something new and wonderful has happened. And I consider this gathering to be new and wonderful. So I'm going to go ahead and do a Shehechianu as well. Baruch atah Adonai Eloheinu melech haolam shehechianu v'kimanu v'higianu lazman hazeh. And I'll get this guy in here. This is so hard to do with a tremor. Okay. All right. You know what? I'm gonna give that a minute, and I'll do it when other people start talking. But I also want to mention that we're together tonight as activists in the spirit of connecting our Jewishness to activism. The core tenet, Jewish tenet of Tikkun Olam, which is fixing the world, is, I think, necessarily activist, and we'll all get the opportunity tonight to share what that sort of things means for each of us. So happy Hanukkah, Chag Hanukkah Sameach, and in my diaspora language, which is Yiddish, Freilichen Hanukkah. Thanks.
Thank you so much, Jude. Also, your voice is amazingly beautiful. So thank you for that.
Yes, that was lovely. Shout out to everybody in the chat. We got like I think 280 people right now. That's
I
awesome.
know.
Shout out to a First Nations Canadian who's watching from Winnipeg, Winterpeg. How cold is Winterpeg right now, Miss Missy? I'm from Vancouver,
Winterpeg.
so yeah.
Yes. Thank you so much, everybody that is coming. This is very, very wonderful. Yeah, somebody also said, yeah, casually the most beautiful voice ever. Seconding
Yeah.
that.
Seriously.
Yeah.
Seriously.
Let's see. So I know Hadar is still so I'm just looking at our agenda. I know Hadar may still be in the car on her way here. Should we switch things around a little bit? What should we do in their next
Yeah.
item?
And I see Mira in the chat. Are we still,
Yeah.
have we not found a way to let her in?
Okay, so I'm for some reason I upgraded so we could have up to 10 people on the stream, but for some reason it's not going. We might have to hop over to a different live stream because they're telling me I have to create a new one now.
Got it.
But why don't y'all start? Why don't we start just talking about what Hanukkah like means to us? And I'm gonna set this all up, and then I'll put links in the chat where everyone can hop over to.
Thank you, Sim.
Fortunately, hopping around from location to location at a moment's notice is no problem for this people.
You know it.
The meaning of Hanukkah?
Yeah, what is it? What does it mean to you?
Well, it's a grab bag of meanings, really. As so many Jewish holidays are. I mean, my favorite one is probably Passover. But I guess this year the meaning of Hanukkah is a bit closer to home for me. Look, the generic meaning of every Jewish holiday, as we all know, as the joke all goes, say it all together, they tried to kill us, we won, let's eat. So in that you hear resiliency and you hear, something that can't be killed, something that can't be wiped out, something that's more lasting than temporary regimes. You might see where I'm going with this. In the case of Hanukkah, it's also a story of, miracles, abundance in scarcity, because the story, I imagine someone's actually going to tell the story tonight, but it involves a resistance to an occupation and an effort to reconsecrate or keep sacred a temple that was in danger of being completely destroyed by a massively overpowered army, the Greeks. And there was only enough sacred oil to last for one night, and it lasted for 8 nights. So finding abundance in scarcity and faith. But there's an element as well that I think we often kind of wink about. But this year there's no winking it away, and that's resistance, like serious hardcore militant resistance. There's a description in, I think, Bar Kokhba, the ancient historian, of a Greek soldier describing what the Maccabees looked like and sounded like when they came into battle against the Greeks. The Maccabees were the Jewish rebels who lived up in the hills and the caves. And the description is of a fearsome terrorist resistance. There's just no way around it. Just and terrifying to the organized army of this power that's used to just rolling over people. And so this refusal to die and refusal to be disappeared, and a willingness to claim our right to exist. And if that means to resist violently, it means to resist violently. Now, I'm not saying that to be dogmatic about anything or idealize anything or even valorize anything. I'm just saying it's in our DNA, and we got to deal with that in a moment like this, when what we're watching unfold is a massive, catastrophic, what's the word? Retribution for the crime of a people refusing to die. And there's just something so deeply, obscenely, beautifully, perfectly ironic about that. So that's what it means to me in this moment. And it must mean a whole lot of other things too. So let me pass it over to someone else.
Daniel, I really appreciate that framing, particularly the highlighting of armed resistance, that resistance is not peace, and that peace does not have to be the goal until equity or justice are achieved. And the two thoughts that I want to share, one is a poem that I wrote a few weeks ago that people may have seen online, and the other is about symbolism. But the poem really highlights, as I was sort of anticipating Hanukkah and anticipating this holiday that is so focused on resilience, is just the kinship and the sort of the treasure map of resistance that's shared between Jews and Palestinians and folks in Gaza. So the poem is, I want to hand Gaza, hand all of Palestine, the oil that was supposed to last one night but burned for 8 days. I want to hand them the spirit that was supposed to break in 1938, but instead built a glittering diaspora, and tell them, you see this resilience? You see this ability to outlast and outlive? This belongs to all of us. This reminds me of you. And every time I see a menorah, I'm thinking about Palestine, and particularly there's this iconic image of a Jewish family in the context of World War I or World War II, I believe, with their menorah in the window, even as the Nazis are overrunning Eastern Germany. And it's this image that so many Jewish people have.
So I'm completely kicked out of both streams.
Rin, we can hear you.
Rin, we see and hear you, literally.
Oh.
I can't even chat in the message thing. I'm like backstage, I guess.
Oh, damn.
You're not. You're live and direct.
When did the Mossad buy StreamYard?
Oh, I'm back.
Hey.
But I still can't hear anything. So
No.
We hear you though.
Well, I think folks are familiar with that iconic image of the menorah in the window, and that as a symbol of resistance, and resistance against a social norm as well, resistance against what is seen as acceptable or placid or peace-oriented. And people who are oppressors expect the submission and the demureness of the people that they would like to oppress. And it was Jews at the time refusing to be submissive and refusing to be demure and insisting, we're here and we exist and we're going to take up space even as you threaten our lives. And I think about the parallel symbol we're seeing now of the Palestinian flag. The Palestinian flag, even when people are trying to rip flags out of people's hands and rip flags down from windows and make them hide flags at protest events, and the refusal to be rendered invisible. And so not only is Hanukkah kind of a tradition for me of resistance and resilience, but it's a tradition of visibility, like very intentional visibility.
Okay.
Yeah. Thank you so much for I love everything that's already been said. One of the things I know I've been struggling with, or has been really painful to see in the last few days, is this violent version of a menorah raised in Gaza on top of the rubble. So in order, I don't know what the latest counts are. Obviously, we can't know what the latest count is of everybody that's been killed. But it's definitely above 18,000, 19,000. And it's so, I know one of the things that I know I've been struggling a lot with and learning a lot about is how these symbols of our resistance that we used for thousands of years, just to protect ourselves and not, colonize others, but that are now that beautiful resistance of the menorah in front of the swastika, but here it is being used as that, because it is that symbol that we know of, that's like, oh, I'm here and I'm taking up space. It's now being used in this really brutal way and used to terrorize other people. And it even kind of reminds me of like Christmas or Easter, holidays of long ago that I know Sim has covered in various videos, where Jews would be attacked on those days. And so it's and something that I know I'll get into. I've been really nerding out about how Hanukkah and the meaning of Hanukkah has changed so much over time. And I know we'll get into that in a little bit, but in very short, for anybody who doesn't know the story of Hanukkah, the very in a nutshell, the Maccabees are this small group that of violent fighters who basically have a revolt in ancient Judea and take back the temple. And so it's become this huge. There's a reason that what I saw, interestingly, like there's more. There's so Zionism and Hanukkah have been presented as if they go together for such a long time. And so I have a lot of mixed feelings, of course, about everything in the last few days, but Hanukkah, like all Jewish holidays, is also, it's one to wrestle with. And there's a whole reason. That's the reason why is at the core of Jewish existence, is wrestling with these histories and these stories that we tell each other. And there's no, I feel like there's no simple answer. But yeah.
I want to chime in.
In fact, do you want to talk about in terms of wrestling, where that shows up in the very naming of who we are?
Yeah. Well, Israel, the word Israel, it's a word that translates to wrestle, and that is God. With God.
To wrestle with God specifically. Israel.
So it's very core to everything. But Sim, what were you gonna jump in on?
Yeah, I just wanted to say though that the reinterpreting of Hanukkah is also a thousands-year-old tradition.
Oh, for sure.
I just found this out this year, that these 3rd century rabbis were like, oh, that Maccabees story is too violent and it doesn't really align with our values currently. I'll find an article and try to drop it in the chat. But they decided to emphasize and maybe created this story of the miracle of the oil, and to focus on this idea of, conservation of oil, sharing. This was 3rd century rabbis saying that sort of Zionist story is really too rough for us. And the original source material, which I wasn't, again, I had this very secular sort of holidays at cousins' houses, Jewish upbringing. I never got the full story about how the Maccabees revolt wasn't just against the Greeks. It was a civil war. They were killing other Jews who were assimilating too much to Greek culture. So it was a fundamentalist thing, really. And these 3rd century rabbis, 1700 years ago, were saying, we're going to de-emphasize that. So there's a very historical Jewish tradition of like, we can reinterpret our own history. We can evolve over time and change. And I think Zionists want to, enshrine their one definition of what Judaism is, what Hanukkah is. And that goes counter to our whole history.
Yeah. Well, so my apologies. Just so, just in case so part of this history is what I'm going to be going into in my whole section. So which is not to be worried about anything like that. Just in case we want to have this full discussion about this topic, and I'll be inviting anybody to talk. But of course, anybody feel free to talk about it right now. But we'll have lots of exciting things.
Can we do a quick little tech check thing? Rin, can you say a few words and we'll all thumbs up if we can all hear you?
Hello. I like boys.
Okay.
And girls.
We can all hear.
We check Hadar's sound too, because we haven't heard from her.
Let's hear from Hadar and Mary. Will y'all introduce yourselves, please?
Hi, can you hear me?
Yeah.
Oh, hi everyone. This is Hadar here. Yeah, Sim, thank you for sharing that. One of the things I've been reflecting on is part of the reason why Zionism was able to really co-opt Judaism is because of Jewish assimilation, right? And because, especially in the US, right, so many of us don't actually have accurate Jewish education around Jewish tradition. And, I think when there isn't knowledge there, it like actually leaves space for co-option. And this is, part of so much of my work. I teach Jewish mysticism and find that it's just really, really important to actually learn and understand our tradition. And yeah, thank you for sharing that, because the Book of Maccabees, was actually banned. And it was actually very controversial in rabbinic time. And, there's so much to go into that. But I guess I just want to really remember that Judaism, like all traditions, it's an alive tradition. I think something in the modern world that we're constantly grappling with is like flattening of reality, right? Things are alive, meaning that they're dynamic, they change moment to moment. And Judaism for sure evolves and change with each generation, with each community, right? Different people add their perspective, their understandings. So to make it seem right like that, and this is part, of the harm of the Zionist project to the Jewish community, is to create like a monolith of what Judaism is. And to me, part of that resistance to it is to actually revive the diversity of thought within Judaism. And that, it's like, yeah, as we're having this conversation of what Hanukkah means to us, that, this is such a part of Jewish tradition, is that there is actually space for different people to share different interpretations of how they are relating to that. And I can go on and on about how fascism is just like about creating something that's like a singular identity. But yeah, I guess I'll introduce myself, and Mira, maybe you'll introduce yourself. And I don't know how this whole thing is facilitated, but we'll talk. I guess we'll share different pieces. So my name is Hadar, Arab Jewish, mystic, educator, and artist. I have my own Jewish and spiritual skill building school dedicated to teaching about God in multi-faith and multi-religious spaces. I've been doing a lot of Palestine solidarity work for, I don't know, the last, 10 years or so, originally from Jerusalem. And yeah, I don't really know what else to say other than something that I feel just in this moment that feels important for me to presence in this time. And I'm just coming after a really full day of so much. It's really sometimes hard, especially I'm in the US now. And I think it's hard that sometimes, when speaking about Palestine, everything feels like it becomes a game or an intellectual analysis. And, this kind of, especially social media, kind of encourages that. And I just really want to recognize how much pain and suffering there is in this moment, and how much grief and how much loss. And, that for me personally, this is such an embodied experience of pain. And that, yeah, I don't know, this is just like part for me of even, relating to Hanukkah, like, what does it mean to be in this much pain and still light candles? So yeah, just really wanting to honor, right, the mind and the mental connection, and right, analyzing and speaking and talking and all these things. And also that there's also the heart, that, I'll speak for me personally, but I feel this is probably true for many of us, right, that my heart's just broken, and every day broken anew. So just really wanted to also present this level of the heart space.
Thank you, Hadar. Thank you for that. I'll introduce myself, and then we'll veer back onto our flow. Hi, everyone. I'm Mira, she, her, they pronouns. And I was late in very Jewish fashion, and then stuck in purgatory in the backstage, which is not so Jewish, but here, I made it. Really grateful to be here with y'all tonight, and other folks some of who I know deeply, and some of whom I'm meeting for the first time. Just incredibly grateful to connect with folks. who are also outspoken and committed to our Jewish values and committed to truth and justice and integrity, regardless of what relationships that might compromise, regardless of what type of pushback we might get, because we know this is our collective freedom journey. And this is something that we are, not doing for likes and clicks and followers, but something that is, as Hadar is saying, is a really, reality, a very real atrocity happening live and direct. And we have the privilege, or I can speak for myself, I have the privilege of like watching people's harm on my screen, and I'm not on the ground in Palestine experiencing any of that violence. And yet again, like, just our work is so committed to ultimately a very real material change that we are desperately yearning for and praying for. I am a mama, have a toddler. I am a queer Ashkenazi white Jew, born and raised in San Francisco, also called the Alamu, on the land of the Ramaytush Ohlone people. I'm a fourth generation San Franciscan, very proud of it, very connected to my city. And I'm an educator. I used to work in high schools, and then now do a lot of consulting and facilitation with schools and businesses and nonprofits. You can read more about my work on my website. And I co-taught Undoing Zionism class about 1.5 years ago that Hadar was one of the educators for, and hoping to kind of launch that again as an opportunity for folks to really engage in the deeper learning and grieving and movement building of this time. I started my anti-Zionist journey 13 years ago, and have been committed since on this path, which is filled with, grief and letting go and recovery, but also deep, deep, deep joy and recommitment to new community and relationships rooted in liberation and justice and integrity. Okay, 415 folks in the chat. And the most transformative thing that I think propelled a lot of my work forward is I spent a summer in Ramallah in 2018. I taught in a summer English program for high school students, and being back in that land after coming out of my Zionist upbringing, after going to Israel twice as a teenager, was just a actually soul-ripping, soul-opening, transformative experience. And I'll talk a little bit about that in the action section when we hit on that shortly. The Brady Bunch, LOL. Yeah, anti-Zionist Brady Bunch. We need that show. I was telling Daniel in our live together, I'm like, we need some anti-Zionist comedy on the screen. I'm trying to make it happen.
I mean, one of the things they taught me well at Zionist summer camp was how to write parody songs and stuff. So, we need theme songs for anything.
You're a man. You're a screenwriter.
I mean, what rhymes with Haredi Bunch? But we're not Haredi. See? You see what I'm saying?
Whew.
So yeah, Hadar, do you want to go? We have an agenda that we've now that we've resolved, I think, all the technical problems, we can sort of get back on track. So I'm going to kick it over to Hadar.
Okay, cool. Thank you. Yeah, well, one thing I just wanted to lift up, as I was saying that my heart's breaking and it's continuing to break as I'm speaking, particularly because, this morning, I actually saw this through Daniel's Instagram, that the director and producers of the Freedom Theater in Jenin got arrested and beaten up. And one of them is a friend of mine. And yeah, it just really shook me in a really deep way. And he's still not released. And yeah, I mean, if you know about Palestinian art culture, you know that the Freedom Theater in Jenin is just so central. And it's been teaching, theater and art and different ways of engaging with kind of art as forms of protest, as forms of education. And I mean, it's such a beacon to the community. And yeah, I guess I'm just feeling really distraught of how it's like, you know, there's kind of this narrative in the media that the Israeli government is kind of pushing around, oh, we're just targeting Hamas, we're just targeting Hamas, and just how, you know, it's really that every Palestinian is actually a target. Every Palestinian that is in some way Palestinian, like all that, that's all that they are, you know, whether it's doctors or journalists or artists. And yeah, I'm just like, every day it's like you find out about a new person, a new family member, a new this, a new that, and it's just so much. So yeah, just, and yeah, folks listening to this, please go support the Freedom Theater. You can follow them on Instagram for updates and such.
I think there is a, not to cut you off or anything, but I think there is a particular like depravity, wickedness, whatever you want to call it, in the specific and intentional targeting of like centers for art, centers for healing, centers for creation, centers for education. Like I think they blew up another UN school today. It's just like, you know, there's such a willful, direct targeting of like all of the things that make a society a society. You know, blowing up libraries and churches and art centers and stuff like that. I don't see how you can see that as anything other than just like a systemic trying to like root out an entire culture, because like it's just such a we've seen this happen historically, like that is never done when you're not trying to just wipe out a people group.
Mm-hmm.
There's a logic to it, isn't there? I mean, there's a very clear internal logic to it, and it's anything but accidental.
Yeah, no, definitely. And I think that's where I also like the narrative gets so distorted, right? Because people are like, oh, see, like, where's the Palestinian leadership? And it's like, well, you know, any Palestinian leadership that's actually justice oriented or human rights oriented, or, you know, is just like constantly targeted. So yeah, it's definitely part of this context. Okay, so I'll share a little bit about I guess we all have pieces that we're supposed to talk about today, and my piece is around Arab Jewish identity. So yeah, my family's been in Jerusalem for over 10 generations, also comes from all over the so-called Middle East region, from Syria, Aleppo, which I grew up with a lot of Syrian traditions, Baghdad, Kurdish, really mixed. And yeah, you know, I think that part of the creation of the state of Israel was really the creation of an enemy that is the Arab, right, or the Arabs, and kind of positioning, oh, Jews versus Arabs, right? And what it did is that it lumped all Jews in this, you know, against anyone who is deemed as Arab. And, you know, we can get into all of that because, right, not everyone in the so-called Middle East is Arab. We have, you know, Kurdish, Persians, Assyrians, Armenians, all sorts of people who are not Arab, but it doesn't really matter to that racial framing, because if you are perceived to be an Arab, then, you know, you're in some ways a threat to Zionism and to the Israeli project. And, you know, when Zionism began, they realized, right, European Jews were just greatly outnumbered by Palestinians and by Arabs, and they needed more Jews to create this project. So they needed to somehow convince the Jewish community, you know, all over the so-called Middle East region, to be part of it. And I think it's really important to understand that in that time, I mean, we're talking about the 1940s, where, you know, the whole world was just in complete upheaval with World War II. And, you know, part of my political perspective is World War II never ended. It actually just got transferred into our region with different players and such. But yeah, there was, you know, this very deliberate strategy to bring kind of, you know, Jews, Arab Jews from their context, uproot them and connect them to, you know, Zionism and the European settler colonial project. And sadly, it was quite successful. I mean, we can go into all sorts of details of how it did that, but it doesn't matter. It was, at this point, it was successful where we are really, this is something that I contemplate and feel a lot of sadness about almost every day, that this is the first time in the history of the world that Jews are not embedded in Muslim societies, which is really, really tragic because, as I said before, that Jewish tradition evolves generation to generation, and part of the evolution is dependent on the context, right? So American Judaism looks a certain way because we're in an American context. So, like the Judaism that is created through American Jews is in some ways in relationship to the dynamics that are happening in America. And part of what, and this was a very strategic colonial strategy by European powers that, happened all over from Algeria to Syria to Iraq, kind of larger Christian European colonial powers realized that the Jews are actually kind of a strategy to help create, this imperialistic project. And they needed the Jewish community to be uprooted. Jewish-Muslim solidarity and Jewish-Muslim relationships is such a threat. So, there was this very strong uprooting. And one example that we can see that happened in Algeria that's famous that people talk about, right? In Algeria, there were people of all sorts of religions living there. Algeria was occupied by France, and the French decided to basically overnight give French citizenship to the Jews who, were Algerian Jews, and kind of separate them from their Arab context. So they were no longer Arab and they were just French. And the Muslims never got, they didn't get the French citizenship. And this created this animosity between the communities, between, Jewish and Muslim communities, because the Muslim communities were like, well, why do the Jews get citizenship? And the Jews were like, okay, well, now we're French. Now we have all these power, so these divide and conquer techniques that happened all over in so many different ways. And, where we are now is, we're so many years, right, after 1940s, but we're still kind of stuck in this paradigm of Jews versus Arabs. That's kind of the solidified view in the media, in the narrative. And, for me, part of political transformation work is really, there's a thinker that talks about this as leverage points, right? Because sometimes when we think about systems, especially the military industrial complex, it's so huge. How do we go up against it? We can't actually fully just destroy the military industrial complex. And the strategic way that we kind of go about it is to find what is called leverage points. We're not actually building something that's greater than the military, but we're just finding what is a leverage point that if I just do a small shift, the kind of system falls. And I really feel like that is, part of this Arab Jewish identity, because it really dismantles a lot of the thought and a lot of the thinking. And yeah, I mean, I can say so much more about this. I'm also, I have a course about it online, and I'm hoping to launch another one because I think that is really, wow, that was really.
I'm so sorry. I meant to block that user. I'm so sorry.
Oh my God.
Yeah, maybe we can talk about anti-Semitism as well, because it's part of everything. But
cue up Flight of the Valkyrie and.
Oh my God! Listen, I was a music major. Don't get me started on Wagner, because I will go on for a while. That man was something else. I think what you're saying, Hadar, though, about the way that they sort of divided and conquered, and sowed this division in Jewish and Muslim communities by granting citizenship to some and not others. It's very reminiscent of how race relations have been handled in the United States historically. You think of the groups like the Irish or the Italians coming over and initially being discriminated against for xenophobic reasons, and then being assimilated into a white paradigm in exchange for leaving other minorities behind. It's a classic strategy. I mean, even going back to Bacon's Rebellion, the lower class workers who were at that point indentured servants, both black and white, were like unifying too much. So they were like, how do we create a paradigm that drives them apart? Oh, let's create racism, basically. So it's like a tried and true strategy among colonizers.
Totally. And and yeah, it's really intense, right? Because this is what happened to so many Arab Jews, right? We basically got uprooted from our contacts, had to completely forget the Arabic language. My grandparents spoke Arabic and my parents didn't pass it on. And that's so true about so many Arab Jewish communities. It's like, if you look at the amount of Arab Jews that speak Arabic, it's like very, very low compared to like our grandparents, who most of them, right, spoke fluent Arabic. And I think that's also where there's so much deconstruction, the way that Arabic is even as a language seen as a threat when it's also like a Jewish language. So many Arab Jewish scholars were writing in Arabic. So it's like we also lost just like this whole, Ariela Azulai, who is an Arab Jewish scholar, talks about this a lot, about the destruction of the Jewish Muslim world, that we actually completely destroyed Judaism in relationship to Islam, and all the teachings, that happened there. So, like growing up and, in an Arab Jewish identity is like so confusing, right? Because on the one hand, you're just like, wait, I eat Arab food, like my songs are all in Arab, right? And growing up in Jerusalem, like you grow up with so much shame. Like, this was, now there's a bit of a different dynamic, but, I was born in the 90s, and like being from there, you're just like, you went to school and you hid the fact that you listened to Arabic music at home because it was embarrassing, right? Like you didn't want to, you tried to, even for me, this is so much part of my personal process. Like, when I was a child, like I would lie to people and pretend I was Ashkenazi and try to like fit in, right? So we, there's this phrase called lehishtaknez, which means to become Ashkenazi. That is used in Israeli society, which is basically, right, an Ashkenazification process to get Arab Jews to really forget their Arabness and forget their roots so that they can become part of the Israeli project. And in the US, we'll call that Ashkenormativity, where, for most people, when they think about Jews, they think about, like Woody Allen, Jon Stewart, right? These very classic, like white Ashkenazi men. And just how much damage that does to, Jews of color, Jews from all over the world. And, this is something that I think about a lot, is like, what is our responsibility to Jews, who are living in the global South and, different communities, and that they're also part of our Jewish landscape. And yeah, sorry, this is not as eloquent as I usually am. I'm usually giving talks about this, but it's been a long day. But basically, I think that Arab Jewish identity feels really key for me here, because I think it's like really challenges just a lot of the paradigms and the narratives. And I think this way of right understanding, and this is something that so many Palestinian activists talk about all the time, that this is not really, the way that the West has kind of positioned this dynamic is that it's Jews versus Muslims, right? This is kind of a religious war. And that was a very intentional way, right? Because we're in the US, which we're in the Christian dominant empire. So the West has, right, an interest. The level of Islamophobia is so intense here. So anyways, right, we can think about it as like the Christian, Muslim, and then the Jews are in the middle, and all these different things. But, part of the, to me, my resistance is around rejecting that, and actually say like, no, I actually, am part of the Arab community. I'm part of, like this wider Muslim community as well through Jewish-Muslim relationship, because this is what my ancestors were doing, like this is part of our lineage. Palestine, and all these countries in the region always had Jewish communities that were part of it, So I think reviving those lineages, and like for me personally, that really comes with relationship, like at this stage in my life, like I'm blessed to have so many beautiful people from, all sorts of identities from the region. And whenever I celebrate Jewish holidays, it's so important to me to invite Palestinians, to invite Arabs, to invite Muslims, to have them, you know, and I think this is because, you know, the project of Zionism is about Jewish supremacy. And for me as a Jewish person, I'm trying to put a different understanding of Judaism out into the world, which is one of inclusion and really one about, you know, mysticism, because that's my work, but, you know, one that is actually about openness to all people. So it's really important for me to be like, no, actually, when I'm lighting my Hanukkah candles, like I want Palestinians to be there with me. I want them to feel welcome in my home. I want them to feel like, you know, and this is what my grandma would do. You know, my grandma, until she died, she had very strong Palestinian friends from Jerusalem. So I just feel that for me, this is part of also continuing my grandma's lineage as well. You know, I think that so often it's like, you know, painted as like Palestinians versus Jews, but it's really not that, right? We're fighting for human rights, and we're acknowledging that, you know, there's an apartheid regime that's been around for a long time that doesn't have any red lines. You know, there's no red line to Israel. There's no like stop button. It just can go and go and go and go and go, and the cost has been so high. So it's like, where is that stop button? That is, I think, what we're all trying to figure out, right? Is like, how do we strategize to get to collectively click on the stop button? So
Can I ask you a question, Hada?
Yeah, please.
So like this false dichotomy between Arab and Jew, right? You and everyone like you is where that dichotomy breaks down. Like you literally are the crossroads of those two things and the coexistence of those two things and the intersection of those two things. Folks like me and the rest of the Ashkenazi people on this stream, we grew up able to exist in a world where we could think of ourselves as on the other side of a dichotomous wall from Arabs. So it's like, it actually is a new way of thinking for me to even though I knew there were Arab Jews, it takes something to interrupt that built-in prejudice. And one of the things about prejudices is that we usually don't realize until much later what the consequences of those prejudices were. So I guess I'm wondering, what are some weeds of illusion and myth that white Jews, Eastern European derived Jews, Ashkenazi Jews can be uprooting in our own mental gardens to like clear out room for like a truer kind of perception? Because it seems to me like it's a really important piece. If we can't update that operating system, it's going to be a lot harder to update our view of what's possible with Palestinian Jewish coexistence.
Totally. Well, I mean, how long do you have? I don't want to take up all the time just talking about this, because this is a very, very long fold with a lot of dynamics. And, you know, part of it is like, you know, I think that there's also like racism within Jewish community of part of why this narrative hasn't been, you know, on the table. And that was also very, very intentional. You know, this is part of why people are so allergic to this word coexistence, because since Oslo, right, Oslo kind of promised this bright future. And, you know, since then, there was all these like organizations of Israelis and Palestinians like trying to create a shared future. But what is not talked about often is like that Mizrahim, which Mizrahi is a term talking to, you know, Jewish Middle Easterners or Arab Jews or however you want to talk about them, right? That's a whole conversation with itself. They were deliberately not invited to that table. And in Hebrew, you have this thing that's called, sorry, this is so specific. I'm like, you have this phrase called the covenant between Ashkenazim and Palestinians, which is basically the narrative that it's like Holocaust, Nakba, Holocaust, Nakba, Holocaust, Nakba. And, you know, it's one dimension of what is happening. And I think that part of what's missing, which I think this is part of what, and I think this is part of what's missing in the Western narrative, is like why so many Arabs see, even if they're not Palestinian, why so many Arabs see Palestine as part of their liberation movement, right? Like in the West, if people know about Palestine, they know about Palestine. They might not necessarily know anything happening about Syria, about Egypt, but in the region, all of these things are so interconnected. And you know what? I think this is why, you know, I was just even with a Kurdish friend this today, Kurdish Muslim friend, and she was telling me about just like how triggering this moment is for everyone from that region, right? Because, we're witnessing what's happening in Gaza, but, Iraqis are traumatized from what happened in Iraq, and Afghans are traumatized from what happened in Afghanistan. And all, like all of these dynamics are so interconnected. And sometimes when we have this conversation about Israel and Palestine, that whole dynamic of the region is completely lost, of how there's been an imperialistic, like, war and military power from the West for so long. And because of that, there's been so much lack of understanding and miseducation about this region. Anyways, that's not necessarily answering your question, but I it's just pointing to how much we don't know in the U.S. largely about. It's not just Arab Jews, right? It's like how much do people know about Armenians, about Kurdish folks, about Assyrians, about so many, about what's happening in all of these different places. And for me, part of my activism is developing an intersectional analysis to this region that actually understands liberation for all of our people, because Palestine does represent that to the whole region, right? Like the fight against Israeli settler colonialism in the Arab mind is a fight against the West. It's a fight against the Western imperialism in general, right? So, and I think being an Arab Jew, right? I remember I was actually in Jerusalem on October 7th, and I was there for the first 10 days, and I was with a Palestinian friend. And, it's getting so, at this point, it's like a full on totalitarian regime. Like, you cannot speak up, you cannot say anything there. And, we were all kind of in panic mode. And she turned to me and she said, no matter what, you're a part of us. You can, the Palestinian community will always have your back. Like, you are part of this community. You're part of the Arab, dynamic. And I think that just like this level of understanding that, for the wider Arab community, right? It's like the Jews who are actually from this region, there's a difference in relationship that we have, because we're not coming from this Western culture place where we actually share the same culture and lineage. So it's a whole other, and I guess I'll just say one more thing before I'll pass it off. And, if anyone wants to chat about it more, we can, but, okay. Yeah. I was thinking about this around the Egyptian revolution that happened in the Arab Spring, right? That one of the kind of understandings that was put out there is like, how do we shift the system of oppression? And part of it was through changing public consciousness, changing perspective, right? And I think that's so powerful, because our consciousness is what is creating narrative and is what is creating the public discourse. And I think that is such a responsibility that we have here, as Jewish people in the US, is to really change the narrative around what is happening, because, right, the narrative is getting so distorted and so false of the way that the media is presenting it. So for me, it's like, yeah, doing also that inner work and that inner consciousness of thinking of like, oh, that's why I think Arab Jews is like a leverage point, because it kind of, you think about it and you're just like, oh, wow, all of this framing kind of falls apart.
Can I add one thing? I know this is like not the deep dive topic, but here we are. Thank you, Hadar. You're like, I could listen to you talk for hours. You already know that. But on my first trip to Israel when I was 16, I remember, I have, few like very vivid memories, but one of them is like learning a super racist word that Ashkenazim call Mizrahim in Israel in Hebrew, just like a super racist word that describes Arab Jews, and thinking of like how that was 20 years ago, like how that has stuck with me as a moment of like, this is part of our culture. This is what we're teaching you. This is something you're walking away with. And as Hadar's saying, like how much that serves the larger project of white supremacy, and how it serves projects around Zionism and the division within Israel and racist white supremacist structure that exists there. And just connects deeply to the assimilation that folks have already named around what is the service of divorcing us from our interconnectedness? What is the service of divorcing us from these lands that we have made homes on for thousands of years? And the purpose of, like creating really single story narratives, which is all societies do this, but especially colonizer and white supremacist societies, of teaching really specific histories and doing that for a purpose. It's not like it's just for fun or because we don't know the full story, right? But it's for a very specific objective within society.
Thank you.
So, now we're going to kick it over to Issa to talk about, and thank you so much, Adar, because that was a wonderful perspective to add. So Issa's going to talk to us a little bit about the history and art of Hanukkah, and I'm very excited.
Awesome. Is it working? Is my share screen working? Yay.
Yeah.
Oh, good. Thank you all so much. Literally everything we're talking about, we could go into for hours, and it would be so totally fascinating and helpful and healing. And I hope for more talks like this. And yes, praying for your good health, Sim, of course. Thank you. So thank you all. What I'm going to do is I'm going to talk a little bit about what we mentioned a bit before, some of the ways that Hanukkah has changed a lot over time. Does anybody want to give anybody that grew up with Hanukkah a lot, as all of us, give when you heard the story of Hanukkah in maybe in a 30 seconds nutshell, what did you hear or what do you remember from that? If anybody want to
I remember the Hanukkah episode of Even Stevens where Lewis gets his bubby comes and takes him to it's like a Christmas Carol thing, but it's no, it's like a Wonderful Life thing, but it's Hanukkah. That was when I first learned about it. I think either that or Arthur.
Yes. Oh my goodness.
Rugrats for my generation.
Rugrats too. Yeah, I do remember the Rugrats one. Yeah, Rugrats actually didn't they do full blown retellings of I know they did a Passover episode of Rugrats where they straight up Tommy was Pharaoh or something. I remember that. No, I think Angelica was Pharaoh.
Oh my gosh. So as we know, Hanukkah is, you guys are mentioning, it's so close to all of our cultural psyche. Whether you're Jewish or not Jewish in America, you see it around because it's shown as the Jewish counterpart to Christmas. But one of the things that is very complicated and difficult is just how much is some myths around Israel are really, really tied into the ways that we think about Hanukkah. And some of those myths are kind of summed up in this article, which I'm not going to be agreeing with in the next few minutes. But basically a very, very short, kind of overall view of what happened during in the Hanukkah story. When was the first Hanukkah celebrated? We're going to go back to 167 BCE. In occupied Jerusalem. So at this point, the Greeks, which I'm going to be calling the Hellenists, had taken over Jerusalem. And at this point, we're not allowing Jews to practice our religion. And so during this time, you had a lot of different Jews, just like today, practicing in different ways. And some kind of wanted to be a little bit more like the Greeks and sort of change up their practice a little bit. Others were much more conservative and really, really wanted to keep very, very strict to the tradition. And a couple of those folks were the Maccabees, who you're seeing you're gonna see some various art from various eras, not from 167 BCE. But this group of rebels known as the Maccabees, which translates to the Hammers, it was a small group of radicals, basically. It launched a campaign, a pretty violent campaign from 167 BCE to 160, so over about 70 years. And so the very short version of the story is that they won, or the idea, what we're told often is that they won. They recaptured the temple and then re-sanctified it with the oil. And then the miracle that dominates I'm reading partially from an article, the miracle that dominates the modern retellings of Hanukkah is not just the marvel of resistance, but it's that the symbol of that resistance, which is the oil that was supposed to last for one night, but lasted all 8 nights. And so one of the most difficult I'll just say is that the closer you look at this story and the closer you look at what we're told about it, the more it starts to break down. So the Zionist kind of imagination around Hanukkah is that we're celebrating these ancient heroes who protected Judaism and the Jewish people through violence and conquest. And so if we start to look closer, we want to ask ourselves, how successful were they, even in doing something like that? So the reality is that in 160 BCE, when we have the first Hanukkah, the Maccabees did not win. They had recaptured the temple, but they were actually defeated by another group called the Seleucids. And then the main character of the whole thing, Judas the Maccabee, was actually killed during that point. The Maccabees, who eventually became what's called the Hasmonean dynasty, we're going to talk about in a little bit, didn't actually rule Judea, where we're looking today now in modern day Palestine. Didn't actually rule Judea until 20 years later, until 140 BCE. So this is the first myth that's kind of broken down, is that they didn't actually win. There was not actually a successful revolt in the beginning. But once they do start ruling, things become a little bit more complicated as well. So one of the things that is a large part about the imagination, or about the imagination of what happened during Hanukkah, or the first Hanukkah, or what happened leading up to the first Hanukkah, is that the Maccabees were really, really pissed off that other Jews in Judea were becoming, quote unquote, Hellenized. Like, they were becoming more like the Greeks that were ruling them. They weren't getting circumcised as much. They were maybe there was a little bit of synchronicity. They were incorporating some of Greek things into their beliefs. And so the early Maccabees really, really didn't like that. And so what they actually did was not just kind of launch an attack on the rulers of the kingdom. They were also attacking other Jews. In fact, the first person that was killed was a Jewish leader. And so they actually even forcibly circumcised lots and lots of Jewish men and boys in a lot of the lands of Judea during the initial revolution. But then one of the really kind of ironic things about this is that and you can read about this. This is a really good article about a lot of these little strange little details. Is that once the Hasmoneans, who were the descendants of the Maccabees, came into power and began the Hasmonean dynasty, they first of all routinely actually violated their own Jewish law, and also became very, very, quote unquote, Hellenistic themselves, and started renaming themselves even with Greek names. John Hyrcanus I, Aristobulus I. These are all different Hasmonean leaders that we're going to talk about in a second. And so that's another weird, kind of ironic thing that sort of started to happen. But most importantly, during this time, the Hasmoneans were, there was about 70 years of rule that they were from 140 BCE to 37 BCE. And so during this state, it was very, very, very violent. There was a lot of people kind of killing each other to be on the throne. It's an incredibly unstable time, actually, to be in Judea.
Game of Thrones Jewish edition.
Extremely much so. Yes, everybody wanted to rule, and it was a really, honestly, even when they did rule, and when it was more or less stable, not so much so. There are a couple of things that I know us probably here in the room, and maybe in the chat as well. Once you kind of learn about the things they were doing during this rule, it is not a wonderful kind of democratic culture. They're colonizing during this time. Matthias' offspring conquered more and more territories and actually forcibly converted people to Judaism. This is the only recorded time in history that we have forcible conversions to Judaism. If you know anything about Judaism at all, you'll know that is not a thing. You have to come to Judaism, within yourself. There's also we have at the same time people that I'm sorry, I'm a little scattered myself. So John Hyrcanus is one of the rulers that colonizes and forcibly converts people to Judaism. Aristobulus I and Hyrcanus II, they enslaved many citizens, committed a lot of murder, and actually finally brought the decline of the Hasmonean state, which, as this article talks about, falls into what she calls moral degradation and internal conflicts, which basically ended up falling to the hands of Herod the Great himself. And Herod, that is, I think, Herod the king that, we might know.
The Christmas story.
From the Christmas story.
Herod, the Jesus Herod, yeah.
Yes, which is actually, it's funny. These stories, they really aren't that far from each other in this strange kind of way. And so this is obviously also a really, what?
Sorry, it's crazy to me that I knew this intellectually.
Yeah.
It's crazy to me that the Hanukkah story predates Christendom, it predates Jesus by 200, 300 years.
It's really wild. No, it's really wild. And it's something very interesting about Judaism that is how confusing and expansive it is just how much Judaism has changed over time. And so, yes, I was also kind of baffled to see just how close how close in years these stories actually are. It's really strange. So it's during this time when Herod and other groups are ruling over, Romans are ruling over Judea, that we see a number of revolts. And unfortunately, well, not really, hard to say, what the rabbis are going to say, but unfortunately, these are not successful and in fact end in great tragedy. So one of the revolts ends in the destruction of the Second Temple, which was the center of Jewish religion for hundreds of years. Another revolt, this is a very weird picture, really weird painting this is an artist who was really active in Zionist circles in the 1920s and 30s. This is the Bar Kokhba revolt from 135 AD. And this also results in enormous amounts of tragedy, enormous amounts of death. And basically, both of these revolts kind of lead to the destruction, or are large parts are large parts of what leads to the destruction and eventually the mass exodus of so many Jews from that land. And so it is after that Sim was talking about this at the beginning, and so this is what we see is that by the 6th century AD, when the Talmud is being written, the Talmud is an enormous amount of books, or kind of one large book, but no one person can read it all. It's centuries of rabbis commenting on stories, on the Torah, and on history. So by the 6th century AD, war no longer seemed like an effective solution to the oppression that Jews were facing. And so by this point, a lot of people, have left that land. But also what the rabbis were starting to look at was the fact that these revolts were very much made in the model, or were looking up to the Maccabees, who had created this sort of successful but then very rocky revolt and then rule some decades earlier. And so by this time, there is a book of the Maccabees, Book of Maccabees 1 and Book of the Maccabees 2, those are historical tellings that are retold in other places. But one thing to note about the Book of the Maccabees 1 and 2 is that these are not Jewish sacred texts. These are Christian texts. They're only holy texts in the Catholic Church and the Eastern Orthodox Christian religion, Christian traditions. So to Jews, they're really more like kind of historical pieces of stories. What is more sacred is what is told and what is written down in the Talmud around 500 CE-ish, maybe. The Talmud, it's always kind of hard to tell when things are written in there. But this is when the rabbis add the tale, which maybe was based on a story that had been passed down of the cruise of oil, which is that why was there 8 nights in the cruise of oil? It's because the Maccabees were originally supposed to celebrate Sukkot, but because they were at war for so long, they were not allowed to celebrate Sukkot, which is 7 days long. And so, or they didn't have the time. And then when they got to the temple, when they were reconsecrating it, it was a miracle for them that it lasted 8 days. And so that piece of the story really is, it's made up. It's a story. But it's a very, very meaningful one. And what it is the rabbis saying, this type of revolution, this kind of violent, not just this type of violent revolution, which, we can have lots of debates about, what are the best tactics and everything when combating empire. But I think also, especially a violent rule. Do we as a people want to violently rule other people as they have violently ruled over us? And I think what they're saying here is, no, our way is one of peace and solidarity. And we are here and we have a quiet resistance, the resistance that we see through a candle, a candle instead of a gun, or whatever the equivalent of a gun was in 600 CE. But it's a what?
Bow and arrow?
A bow and arrow, right. Or a bow and arrow used against people who are oppressed, etc. So it's by really just the 19th century that the Maccabees are revived as heroes. They were really this is gonna sound kind of crazy to anybody that has grown up with them, being very close to the Hanukkah story, but they really were not the heroes of the story. Judith is much more of a hero than the Maccabees were in a lot of times, but they weren't the heroes. They were not the center of the story until Zionism, really, until late 1800s, early 1900s to mid 1900s, political Zionism. I'm showing those are a few Hanukkahs or menorahs that are from before that time. So I'm going to skip ahead to our Maccabee menorahs that really only start coming up in the mid 20th century. Sorry, the caption on this picture is wrong. That's from something else. This is from the 40s or 50s or something, this menorah. And so what we start to see in a really odd way is even some founding kind of songs or poems in Israel, changing the meaning of Hanukkah itself, or changing the story. And so because one of the things that the rabbis were doing was they were decentering human, the kind of rule or presence of human action. And they wanted to replace that with God, basically saying, we're not going to save ourselves through violently oppressing other people. We're going to say, or through violence, really. We want to do things in a pacifist way, but we're going to save ourselves, or eventually God will save us, and kind of allow us to rule ourselves again by being better Jews, or by being better Jews. So that's, in that way, they centered the miracle from God by introducing that story of the oil. And so what happens in early 20th century Zionism is that it switches the narrative. So there are popular Hanukkah songs like Mi Ya Melel, which is called which translates to Who Can Recount, which is written by one of the creators of a lot of Hebrew folk music in the 20th century, Menashe Ravina, who reworks the phrase from Psalms 106:2. So the original phrase is, who can recount the mighty acts of the Lord, recite all his praises. And so he changes it to, who can recount the mighty acts of Israel? Who can count them? In every generation, a hero arises, redeemer of the people. And so praise of God has yielded to praise of military victories. And the title Redeemer is now applied to a human rescuer instead of a divine one.
Can I interject something here?
Yeah, of
Issa,
course.
just really quickly.
Yeah.
That is so fascinating because, of course, I remember that song. Me and Israel. I learned recently through interaction with a religiously schooled Jewish person that there's a song that we used to sing at Zionist summer camp it's called Kol Ha'olam Kulo Gesher Tzar Me'od, which means the entire world is a very narrow bridge. And the lyrics that we sang were, the whole world is a very narrow bridge. Ve'hayikar lo lefachad klal, which means, and the main thing to recall is not to have any fear at all. What this person shared with me is actually the original phrase from the rabbi who penned it, who wrote it, was, and it's a slight change that the Zionists made, but it changes the entire meaning. The original phrase was lo lehitfached klal, which means not to scare oneself. The main thing is don't scare yourself. Don't make a fetish out of your own fear. Don't believe in the mindset of separation. It's a mystical, it's a deep humanistic thing. And they took that and they just turned it into some kind of Scientologist, like rah, like be all you can be in the army kind of thing. Really. And by changing a little prefix in this lyric, it loses a whole kind of meaning and it becomes useful to a whole other kind of meaning. It's incredible, the power of words in songs.
Wow.
I also think that like something that I've been kind of mulling over is like, you're talking about how like the focus from a Zionist perspective became less about like the accomplishments of God and more about the accomplishments of like military victory. And it kind of reminds me of like how the path that like Christianity has taken in a Western context, because when Hadar was talking about like the coexistence of like Muslims and Jews, I was thinking a lot about the Palestinian Christians I know and how they also, like Arab Christians, often found themselves in community with Jews and Muslims, and there was nothing, they were living peacefully. We all know that there are Palestinian Christians and who have lived at peace. Someone pointed out, isn't it ironic that the one of the oldest Christian churches in the world is in Palestine, and it existed untouched, unharmed under Muslim rule for thousands of years, and then it got bombed under like Israel's rule. Like how does that quite track? And yet you have a lot of Western Christians, Western American Christians in general, who are like very pro-Zionist. Like unfortunately, like most of my family is Christian, and a lot of them are quite Zionist. And it's for a very weird. The reason that Christians are Zionists is a very weird, long story that I won't get into right now. But I do think it's interesting because I think that Christianity in a Western context has also taken a very us versus them militaristic kind of vibe, and all of the like Middle Eastern Christians that I know have a much different perspective on like what God's call is on their life as a Christian. Whereas if you talk to a lot of American Christians, it's like, we gotta conquer the bads and we gotta, the Muslims are going to hell and all this stuff. Like this very sort of us versus them, we gotta fight kind of militaristic idea versus like an actual wanting to like better the world through your religion.
Yeah, there was a really freaky story recently from a pastor who like was kind of reporting on like a super fundamentalist conference, and somebody told him at the conference that they believed Jesus was too weak. And so this is where we're seeing these like images of Jesus with a machine gun, which is like bananas in so many ways. But I love that you brought that up because the parallels really are so crazy. But yes, this is my last slide. I have a bunch more songs that make that weird transition, but Daniel's example was so elegant. That's really it. That the last thing is that there's a whole history of being the quote unquote Jewish strongman that is so fundamental to early Zionism, but straight up until today. And this is why we have something called why there is a thing that exists called the Maccabee Games, which is like supposed to be like the Israeli or Jewish Olympics, but it's all based on the Maccabees. Anyway, wild times. And I definitely, anybody can always reach out to me for any resources on any of that. So anyway, thank you. Thank you for letting me spill my guts about this thing I've been obsessed with for the last 8 days.
Thank you. That was very informative and interesting.
Yeah, that was incredible, Lisa. I learned so much just now. I've been taken to school.
Me
So next
too.
we're gonna have Mira talk about some different like ideas for anti-Zionist Jews in this season to be in solidarity with Palestine and to make a difference.
Thank you, Issa. That was super dope. I need your slides and like the audio playback. Maybe you can just call me and give me like a one-on-one tutorial because I need all of that. I'm above the YouTube recording, you know. So this moment, of course, and I think as after we reach a ceasefire, this is kind of just wisdom I want to guide us for the rest of our quest for a free Palestine and for an ongoing divorcing of Judaism and Zionism. And there's so many large and small ways to take action, and it's truly every single person is needed. And in the moments, I know we've all felt waves of deep hopelessness and rage and grief and like what's even the purpose of posting online that actually doesn't do anything or whatnot, and those comes in all the cycles. But remembering that every single person's action and presence is sacred and holy and necessary, and you have a really deep impact and purpose that you were born to achieve. And I think so much of our action, we think it needs to look a certain way, but there are many ways to plug in. So first, I really think the action of ritual is super sacred and necessary. There is, just holding prayer as central to your work, whether you are someone who believes in God or doesn't, or believes in your ancestors or the earth or whatever spirits you feel connected to, really being deeply rooted in ritual. And particularly for those of us who are Jewish and were raised Zionist, being able to reclaim ritual, as Hadar named, reclaiming the things that were stripped from us through assimilation, whether we had to assimilate into white Americanness in this continent or white Canadianness, or into a unilateral kind of Israeli identity, but being able to return to ritual, return to things that our ancestors held sacred for dozens and dozens of years, many centuries, and using that as action, I think, is so incredibly sacred. Whether that is burning certain herbs, whether that is, connection to the new moon and being really rooted in moon cycles, whether that is connection to water, right? And creating opportunities to do ritual cleansing and water a mikvah, either on your own or with community, and prayer and connection to all the sacred elements around us. Another one, of course, is organizing your Jewish spaces. It is, I think, the most important work ahead of long-term transformation of our Jewish institutions. And of course, with that looks like joining a group. And I think there's, I've seen some content online like bashing JVP or bashing different organizations. And while every political movement has much room for transformation and opportunity to be stronger and better, really joining organized political social movements is so crucial, especially around long-term development, long-term campaigns, specifically like a free Palestine. So getting involved in your local JVP chapter, if not now chapter. IJAN is the group that really brought me into my anti-Zionism. That's the International Jewish Anti-Zionist Network. But, I think I felt this in my early 20s of like, I'm hella cool. I don't need to be involved in an org. Like, I'm going to do things on my own and There's a lot of ego that is really present, I think, in a lot of movement spaces or people on the left, and recognizing how much our ego or our judgments or our condemnation of other people's politics or things actually stop us from building momentum and building really deep, inclusive involvement in leftist movements. Like, the right is way more organized than we are. We spend a lot of time bashing each other and a lot of time critiquing or being doper, being, more conscious, who's more critical, and the right is not doing that. They're like, cool, you got your guns, you're ready to go, you know? So being, again, involving yourself and organizing, and then again, transforming your Jewish spaces. I'm on a group right now with a bunch of amazing other alumni of our Jewish camp here in California, and we're working to call for our camp to call for a ceasefire and long-term organizing around Palestinian solidarity. And again, this more divorcing of Judaism from Israel and Zionism. That doesn't mean necessarily from Israeli people, right? But from the project of Israel in your community. So whether you're involved in your kid's Jewish preschool or your synagogue or a Jewish film festival group that is in your city or whatnot, you know, like organizing in there. And I think it can also feel really isolating, but I want to remind you that you always have allies. You always have allies. You are probably 99.99% not the only person with your politics in that space. And yet Jewish institutions really try. We've seen all the emails and the action and lack of inaction. We've seen all the reminders that they try to label us all as Zionists, label us all as 1,000%, unequivocally dedicated to Israel. And I think it's so crucial that we really, are loud and proud and open that like not every Jew is a Zionist, and you cannot continuously kick us out and kick our ideologies out of the Jewish community. We see a lot of shaming and othering and what's the word? Like not exorcism. That's a different thing.
Ostracization.
Thank you. See, Daniel, the wordsmith. I knew he had it for me.
Rin was
even more. Is that the word you're?
Thank you. Thank you, Rin. Thank you, Daniel. Of Jews with our politics, and it can encourage folks to feel shut down. And I think it's so essential that you remember you have folks in there and build those relationships and work to transform your Jewish institutions. Obviously, right now, all the calls for organizing for a ceasefire and blockades of the different weapons manufacturers and investors in Israel, and following the work of Palestinian leadership and Palestinian organizations that continuously drive us to those radical movements. Your local JVP chapter is probably in solidarity with the local Palestinian Youth Movement chapter or other Arab and Palestinian organizing spaces. I'm really grateful to be in the Bay Area, where we in JVP are in solidarity with both PYM and AROC, the Arab Resource and Organizing Center, an amazing, amazing institution. And then donating, right? Like funding Palestinian wellness and healing and all the realms of resistance. So we're going to do a little bit of that right now. And I want to share a link to the Palestinian Youth Movement in the chat. They are an incredible organization that I learned recently. Can y'all see this link? It says it failed to post. Oh Lord. Can someone else try? I'm gonna put it in our little private chat. Can someone else put there?
Send it to me. I can post links.
Thank you.
Fortunately, it's pretty catchy. It's PalestinianYouthMovement.com.
Easy peasy. And I want you to take a moment to check them out and donate what you can. That is a huge mitzvah. It's an important component of Judaism to continuously give tzedakah and give money anonymously. That's one of the highest forms of sacredness, right? Great, amazing. Y'all can see that. And then if you go to the website, the top right tab is donate. Okay. And if you can give literally $3, if you can give $18, in Judaism, it's a pretty sacred practice to give in multiples of 18. So people will often give $18 or $360 or $72. And we invite you to, if you can, make your name anonymous, if you feel more comfortable doing that. I don't know if you can actually, since you're logged into your YouTube account, but you can throw in the chat what you gave. And I like doing this when I lead like online facilitations of doing it anonymously and then seeing what we have the power to kind of harness in each moment for mutual aid and for redistribution of wealth and power. PYM is an amazing org that is across the diaspora. They organize Palestinian young people in the US, in Canada, and in Europe. They have chapters in England and in Italy. And they are completely volunteer run. I learned that last week. They do not have one person who is in any paid staff position, which is wild to imagine for how much work they do and how much amazing impact they have. So they organize young people to continue holding on to Palestinian culture and custom and history. They do a lot of organizing within for different campaigns in Palestine and across the diaspora, across the US. And they do a lot of organizing work with schools and school districts to, reject anti-Arab and Zionist narratives and things of the sort. So if you have the opportunity to donate, you can throw that in the chat. If not, thank you so much, Stephen. Thank you, Mr. T. Thank you, Scholar Schbrau. And whoever else. Again, you don't need to put your number in the chat if you don't feel compelled to, but they're an amazing org. And so getting tapped in with them and their calls, I think, is a crucial component of action in this moment. Thank you, Bobby. Hi, Bobby.
Thank you so much, Mira. Next up, we're going to have, I have to actually check the schedule. Katie is going to talk to us about taking care of our mental health because this is a marathon.
Absolutely. So again, my name is Katie Bogan, she, her pronouns. I'm a fourth-year doctoral student in clinical psychology at the University of Nebraska. So I'm getting my PhD in specifically trauma-focused treatments for sexual trauma. So I work with sexual trauma survivors who have difficulties with their sexual functioning after rape or assault. I'm an anti-Zionist Jew. I was raised fairly I guess on the line between reform and conservative by my family. I attended a Hasidic Chabad growing up because it was the only Jewish space in my town. I lived in a hometown of 8,000 people, and then I converted to Reconstructionism in my early 20s. So my Jewish socialization has been all over the sort of map of sectarianism, at least in North America. And I'm really excited to be here. Part of my work as a trauma therapist is on embodiment and what I call moving the sliders. And I think one of the things that's been so challenging about this movement, and Mira, you spoke to this so beautifully, is there's this this disparity that's presented to us as you are either allowed to be happy or sad. You can either experience joy or grief. You can either experience pleasure or pain. And we tend to think of all of these pairs on a single slider, each pair, sort of moving back and forth between pain and pleasure or between grief and joy. And I'd like to propose to everyone here that each one of those experiences is on its individual slider. There might be days when you're experiencing 80% grief, but still 40% joy on its own joy slider. And you might be experiencing 70% pain, but maybe you have really good sex that day and you're still experiencing 80% pleasure. And so we have to sort of stop thinking about these sliders as things that are interdependent, where you can't move one without touching the other, because fundamentally, not only is that untrue, but it alienates us, it divorces us from our capacity for healing in the context of these really, really painful global movements. And yet we've seen the videos of Palestinian children who are experiencing bombardment and terror and constant threats to their safety, still playing in the streets, still laughing with journalists, still, crying tears of joy when they have food and are experiencing these pieces of pleasure. And in order to sustain our movement, we need to be feeling that too. We need to be finding the joy and the pleasure too. And I think folks have talked today about this idea of activistic perfectionism, where you have to be the ideal A1 activist. You cannot make a mistake. You are not allowed to deviate. I had someone today bring up the fact that I published an article with Hey Alma in 2019. This article was about a civil disobedience arrest. I was arrested for protesting an ICE detention facility. that was working to remove migrant families from the United States. And I was told in this post that publishing with Hey Alma at all, because Hey Alma is now an explicitly Zionist organization, is a betrayal of the movement. And having them on my media kit is a betrayal of the movement. And I didn't know until today that Hey Alma was explicitly Zionist. That's my own failure of knowing. I have since removed them from my media kit. But I had this, oh, fuck moment that I'm sure we've all had of, oh, fuck, I failed to be a good activist. Like I did the bad thing, and now I have to scrap to redeem myself and sort of do the good thing. And I would argue that this politic of perfectionism slaughters our productivity. It kills our momentum. It keeps us from experiencing the joy that is possible in community building. And it makes us feel like failures, even when we are working for the good. And one of the pieces of this perfectionism is sort of you're not allowed to be happy. Like you have to be in grief all the time. You have to be in pain all the time, because if you are not experiencing the grief and the pain 100% of the time, then you are betraying the movement, and you are betraying Palestinian children, and you are ignoring Palestinian pain, and you are sort of alienating yourself from the suffering and the trauma of Palestinian people. And we must, I think, for not only our safety, but for the safety of Palestinians, reject that premise that the only thing we're allowed to feel right now is pain, because that is what leads to burnout. As a trauma scholar, I know that the more hurt we embody and the more hurt that we hold, the faster we burn out. And I'm not telling you all to turn off your empathy and to toggle off the parts of you that feel pain. I'm saying keep the pain on and feel it and sit with it, and also feel the joy. And because I'm a sex therapist and a sex researcher, I have no idea how to do respectability politics about sexuality. So I'm not going to try, because I just don't know how to do that. And at the start of COVID, I was feeling so alienated from my body and so confused about the role that pleasure was allowed to play in my life when so many people were suffering, that in resistance to that perfectionism of you must grieve all the time, I started a daily orgasm practice, which is, I was single at the time, and I'm like, every single day, I'm going to give myself at least one orgasm. It is a gift I can give to myself that allows me to have dopamine in my system and oxytocin in my system and feel at home in my body and experience joy. And it helped me stay grounded in a sense of embodiment at this time when people were really, really suffering. And my instinctual response, as all of our instinctual responses are to pain, is to avoid. You've got to hop up to the cognitive space. You've got to disembody. You've got to disassociate so that you don't feel that pain. And having an orgasm every day got me into my body every day. So yes, I could feel the pleasure and get the dopamine and get the serotonin and sit with the pain and the hurt and not feel like I had to run away from it, because I was experiencing these two beautiful, profound things on their own sliders. And so my, I guess, advice as a trauma therapist is rejecting the premise of activistic perfection. It's impossible to achieve. You will always feel like a failure. Setting yourself up on these numerous sliders so that you can move them as you need to, and recognize that joy and grief do coexist, and so do pain and pleasure. And really sinking into your body in whatever that means to you. For me, it's orgasms. I feel like I'm a feminist sex therapist. I've had to advocate for my sexual pleasure my entire life. I'm 30 years old. I'm sick of like people neglecting the pleasure of, people who are queer, people with clitorises, or any sort of group that is left out of the pleasure conversation. So that was really useful for me, but maybe for you, it's bubble baths. Maybe for you, it's brushing or braiding your hair. Maybe for you, it's a skincare routine. I don't really care what it is. It could be a mikvah. It could be a mitzvah. It could be sort of whatever you need to feel embodied joy, but get in there, like really do it in a way that allows you access to play and pleasure. And I want to speak as well. I know I have like 2 minutes left, so I will try to keep it speedy. I want to speak as well to this idea of forming the spaces that you need. And for me, forming the spaces that I need is talking loudly about orgasms in this space. and bringing in the body as a site of healing into this space. But one of the pieces of labor that I'm doing to sort of build more inclusive Jewish community is attempting to reshape what the conversion process to Judaism looks like. And I'm sure if folks are following me on social media, you might have seen this. But it is very hard in North America and in the United States to convert to Judaism if you are explicitly anti-Zionist, because rabbis will refuse you their endorsement or their facilitation of your conversion process. And so we are shifting away in Reconstructionism to purely rabbi-facilitated conversions toward community-facilitated conversions, where you have 3 Jews who are a witness. You are able to do an immersion process that is your mikvah. You are tasked with doing a mitzvah or a good deed. You are, tasked with learning lessons about Jewish life and culture over 6 months. And then you can convert, because Israel should not get to say, based on their sort of training of North American rabbis, what Jewish conversion looks like in the United States, and should not get to say that we have to endorse a genocide in order for people to convert. So that's another way that I'm finding pleasure, is in being a rabble-rousing radical activist who says things that are uncomfortable in conversion spaces. And I'll leave you, I guess, with the idea of the liquid borders of community, which is, as I've talked about all of these things online, I've had so many fellow Jewish people say, she's not ours. We don't claim her. We don't want her. We don't want her because she's anti-Zionist. We don't want her because she's queer. We don't want her because she abandons respectability politics. Whatever it is, we don't want her. And then I've seen the anti-Zionist Jewish community and the Palestinian community, the Arab community, the Muslim community say, then she is ours. If you don't want her, if you won't hold her and everything that she is, we've got her. And that idea of liquidity, not only liquidity in the body of experiencing orgasms and like getting wet, literally, liquidity in conversion and in really being in the mikvah and doing an immersion, liquidity in our community of moving across these borders and spaces as if we are water molecules and can just do that because we say it is so, I think is really profound and beautiful. And it's one of the things that's connected me to my Judaism over the last 2 months and connected me to all of the beautiful people in this space. So I hope I didn't take too long. Thank you all so much. I really appreciate it.
Oh, thank you so much for that, Catherine. That was like really powerful stuff. And I think that another key point to what you were saying about like how it's important to keep the pleasure with the pain and to recognize pleasure, I think it also serves to humanize Palestinians. Like when I was like today I was coming across a video of some Palestinian children who were laughing and rejoicing because like some aid had gotten through to them and they were able to get like fresh apples and bottles of clean water. And I shared that to my story because I've been sharing a lot of suffering to my story, but I'm like, these are still human beings. Like we need to, if we see them only as like trauma porn, we're not going to see them as human beings. If we only share when Palestinians are suffering, we do not see them as human beings who laugh and have joy and have children and dance and play and sing. I shared another video of like Motaz and a bunch of other Palestinian journalists who were just gathered together and they were just singing songs. Like these are humans. We have to see them in the fullness of their humanity, not just their suffering.
Yeah. Perfect activists don't get to be happy and neither do perfect victims.
Yes.
So let's just break that chain.
Thank you so much, Katie. Now we're going to pass it over to Daniel for super important wisdom on how we can better talk to our Zionist, relatives and community. So kind of harkening back to what Mira said about one of the biggest projects in front of us is challenging the Zionism in our Jewish institutions. So go ahead, Daniel, and that'll kind of close us out for tonight.
Well, thank you. As a white heterosexual male, it's a real sacrifice for me to come on here and listen to all these beautiful women and beautiful folks speak about pleasure and celebration and orgasms, and I'm just doing my part for the movement, really, on a Wednesday night. I'm honored to go last, and I'm honored to have been present for all of this learning, and I'm very tired. And I don't have anything prepared. And I feel like when it comes to how to speak to friends and family, it's so case by case. that I'm almost inclined to say, I'm just going to read a few things here. And I almost just want to offer to anyone who's watching. I do this thing called mental chiropractic. It's a service I offer. I take walks with people, help them get stuck, usually for just issues in your life. But I have a free 15-minute consult service that people can sign up for at my website. And I just want to offer to anyone who just wants to sign up to do like a free consult with me about a specific person in your life you want to talk to, not even like come do a consult and then buy my service. Just book a 15-minute session and let me coach you about how to talk to that person. That I think that might be the most targeted way, you know. But what I can do right now, and that's at walkwithdaniel.com. What I can do right now is read a couple of things that I think speak to the overall dynamic of what's going on under the surface of what we're seeing. And the first thing I want to say is no one is obligated to talk to anybody in their life about anything. You're not obligated to convert anybody. You're not obligated to convince anyone of anything. You're not obligated to tolerate anyone else's stuff. You're certainly not obligated to take anyone else's abuse or their knee-jerk reactions to you, the tropes they throw at you, self-hating Jew, all that. You're not required to go into that fray. And if you don't go into that fray, you're not a bad ally. You're not a bad activist. There's no such thing as a bad activist. Exactly what Catherine said. All of that. That said, you might want to. And if you find yourself wanting to, that's the best reason to do it. And that's the only fucking reason I'm doing it. Like I said, on October 8th, I picked up my phone and started talking at it because I had a sense that I had something that needed to be said and I needed to hear it. And I figured, well, I might as well have other people hear it too. And I didn't know what it was going to be. But I had a sense that in speaking, I was going to crystallize some things for myself. And I've found myself enjoying watching what happens when my observations hit other people's ears and minds. And sometimes they hit people's minds and ears like, what are you saying? How could you be saying that? Now, when I hear that question, how could I be saying that? I can have one reaction, which is defensive. Like, what do you mean? That's what I believe. I'm right. Get with it or hit the highway. But another part of me that's much more engaging is like, well, let me see if I can explain to you how I see it that way. I mean, I just said it and you shouldn't take my word for it. And I could make you wrong that you didn't watch Noam Chomsky's documentary Manufacturing Consent when you were 15 years old in 1991, like I did, and have your world change. And I could make you wrong that, you know, you didn't volunteer at the Alternative Information Center, the anti-Zionist center in Jerusalem when you were living in Israel in 1993, like I did. So I could basically make you wrong that you're not me and that you don't have my frames of reference. Or I could imagine for a second what it's like to be you, given what you know, given what you've learned, given everything you've been taught. And you're hearing this stuff coming out of my mouth, like I'm not going to condemn what Hamas did on October 7th. I'm going to tell you why it was inevitable. What a strange thing to hear, given what you've been taught, given what the rest of the media is telling you. Well, I don't feel put upon if someone asks me to elaborate on that. In fact, it's a huge opportunity to elaborate on it. And what I've been listening for and learning to tell the difference between is when someone's asking a genuine question and when they're just doing a gotcha and they're just trying to shut you up or shut their own, like, la, 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 I don't want to hear it. Now, if it's that, then you can just make fun of them and move along or just, you know, nod and deeply bow and say goodbye and all that. But if you know, there's a crack in everything, it's how the light gets in. Rabbi Leonard Cohen said it. If you can listen for that crack, then you have a chance of reaching people, because what they're actually trying to do is they're trying to resolve a very painful rift inside of themselves. So I'll start by just reciting some lyrics to a song that I wrote in 1997, back when before I started writing musical theater. I thought I was going to be the male Ani DeFranco. I was like playing, you know, acoustic guitar. I was at my Zionist summer camp. You know, it was real pure, you know. I was like writing Ani DeFranco style songs, trying to impress chicks. It was like really super like true to the cause. But also because I loved her and I loved the way she expressed herself. And I was at this summer camp, and I think it was it the summer that I was Rogan's counselor? Maybe. But I tried to insert some pro-Palestine content into one of our special days around Israel's birth, Israel's independence. And I got a huge amount of pushback. from some of my co-counselors. And I wrote this song called No Matter How You Will It. And those of you who have been schooled in the Zionist world, that phrase should trigger something, because the founding slogan of Zionism is Im Tirtzu Enzo Agada, Theodor Herzl. And the translation is, if you will it, it is no dream. Now, what's funny is that on an individual personal power kind of be all you can be Tony Robbins sort of level, that's fine. There's nothing wrong with that. If you will it, it is no dream. It's like what Marty McFly taught to his father in Back to the Future. If you put your mind to it, you can accomplish anything. Nothing wrong with that in your personal life. But I heard a different contradiction inside of that. So the lyrics went, you can feel it crumbling, your hold on what you've learned and what you've needed to be true. And now I see you stumbling through sentences that break apart and reveal the rift inside of you. Because no matter how you will it, it's still a dream if you can't see reality for what it is and what it always was. And you can try to kill it and try to justify your blindness, but it's going to come up from behind you. And I don't think I want to be there when it does. And I remember when I wrote that song, I was just looking at these people flailing on the verge of a disillusionment that had come for them. The time to hold on to these contradictions and to keep trying to square these circles was, the time was ticking. This is in 1997. I don't know if some of these people are still hanging on by their fingernails to these illusions. But I had compassion for it, and I also had anger at it, and I had both. I was like impatient with them. I'm like, don't you see? But also I could just see it's such a human thing to not want to lose your illusions. Another great feminist songwriter, Axl Rose of Guns N' Roses, has a lyric that says, I've worked too hard for my illusions just to throw them all away. And it's so true. We're like that. We don't want to lose our illusions. So I'll just read a little bit from the book I wrote with my dad, from our final chapter about what it takes to vision a sane society. And this section is about disillusionment, and the I and the me and the myself in this writing is my dad, but I actually think this section might have been written by me a little bit more. Anyway, if we're out to see things as they are, we must be willing, even hungry, to shed our illusions. We have to welcome being disillusioned, perhaps even as Alanis Morissette does in the chorus of one of her hit singles, Thank It. Remember that song, Thank You, Disillusionment? She actually says that in the chorus of a pop song. Commonly, we speak of disillusionment ruefully as an experience to be avoided, akin to disappointment or a sense of having been betrayed. And it does carry a cost. We may have to let go of something we've come to value, or a perspective or attitude we've taken refuge in. What we see less easily, however, is the cost of refusing. As I often ask people, would you prefer to be illusioned or disillusioned? Would we rather engage with the world as it really is, or only as we wish it were? Which approach brings more suffering in the end? And then we tell the story of some of his serial disillusionments, from being a little communist in Hungary, to being a big American booster, to being a Vietnam War activist, to being a Zionist, to realizing that the Zionist dream came at the price of a Palestinian nightmare. And then we say, when a false belief falls away, after the ache of loss and sense of being unmoored subsides, I have noticed that something in me relaxes, no longer tasked with squaring circles and holding together impossible contradictions. Ignorance may bring a blissed out tranquility, but that is not true bliss. On the collective level, it can result in great and wide suffering. We do ourselves and the world a profound service when we endeavor to dissolve our illusions and open ourselves to the truths they conceal. And so I guess what I want to offer as a possible view is that if you're carrying unwelcome truths and there's people in your life who are fighting you on them, but you sense that there's a crack there where they're actually asking you to explain something to them, like, how can it be that this is true, or I thought this was true, and yet this, they don't know how to, they don't have the language for it. But you could consider that they're asking you to set them free on a certain level. They're asking you to show them a way of looking at the world that reconciles their commitment to Jewish togetherness and security and safety, and rejoin them with their actual values. I mean, most people are not genocidal at heart. They don't want to justify that shit, but they find themselves justifying it to hold on to other views that they're not ready to let go of. So if you can carry that, the lightness of that, and for me, there's a joy and a kind of delight in being able to offer that to people. You may surprise yourself, and the people around you may surprise you in terms of even just one crack, one opening, one scale falling away from people's eyes. And every single conversation we have is softening up the ground for us to be able to uproot like this massive motherfucking mammoth ideology and actual material structure that is doing so much damage. But as several people have said, I think it was Hadar who talked about the leverage points, the hinge points. We don't know where those pressure points are, and each of us can be one in the conversations we have and the ways we listen and the possibilities we hold as possible. So I hope that opens a vista onto what we might all be able to do out here in the information so-called war.
Daniel, thank you so much. That was really, really illuminating. Well, thank you all so much for being here. This was a wonderful event. I'm just going to give everyone a chance to unmute and sign off, and it will be recorded. It should hopefully be still here at the link. And thank you all again so much for being here and putting up with me being so out of it. So bye, everyone. I'll let everyone kind of take turns signing off.
It was amazing. What a privilege. Thank you all so much.
Yeah, this was an absolute joy and a delight in a context of a lot of pain. And I hope that while you're all working on holding the feeling bad, because that is what keeps us human, you also take some time to feel good, because that is what keeps us moving.
Yes. Thank you, everybody. Thank you, everybody here, all of your wisdom. Oh my goodness, I feel so thankful. Thank you, everybody in the chat. Thank you to everybody who came, even when you're questioning and you're confused. I know that we all are all having those moments right now, and it's just so good to be here with you all.
Thank you so much to everyone who has tuned in, who has listened, who has learned something. I know I've learned a lot of things. It's just been really elucidating and healing to be here. Someone asked me the other day, like, how would I describe Hanukkah, like my Hanukkah this year in like one word? And I have to say healing, because I have this is like my third or fourth event that I've had in the last 8 days. It's been a crazy 8 days, but all of these events have been like with other anti-Zionist or non-Zionist Jews. And I had been feeling very sort of adrift in my Judaism, where I was feeling alienated from my like Jewish community that I had, and building community with other like-minded Jews, and just knowing that there is room for this thought and for my politic has been just really healing. And it's just, yeah, this has been, this is part of a series of very healing events for my Hanukkah this year.
Thank you all so much. Yeah, this was really beautiful. And just for me, just demonstrates the importance of relationships and this work. I mean, in activism in general, right? If we don't have relationships, not only do we burn out or fall apart, but we also don't get reflected, both for like perhaps a piece that we don't fully see, or, sharpen our analysis. And I think community and relationships and is just so core to this work. So yeah, just really grateful for all of us kind of coming together, for everyone for tuning in. And yeah, grateful to be part of this.
Yeah, I mean, just two things to say. Number one, when's the next Jewish holiday? Because you know what? As long
Friday.
as, what's that?
Friday night.
Friday night. Okay, sure. Well, we could do so. We could start some Shabbat tradition. But I mean, look, as long as this stuff is going, I mean, Tu B'Shvat, right, coming up. I don't know. As long as there's meaning to make out of the world. I'm not a religious ritual person, but man, we've been bequeathed some traditions and some stories and some ideas and a tradition that encourages us to debate about it and make meaning out of it, and to make meaning that fits the world we're in. And I don't anticipate that when, come Tu B'Shvat or come Purim or come Passover or whatever, we're going to be done with this issue. So I hope we can keep each other's numbers on speed dial and invite others and do things, because I think it's a really meaningful way to be spending our time. And it's all about everyone who showed up and was in the chat and asking questions and listening, so thank you for giving us the space to speak. And the other thing I just want to say, just as like an old person, I'm just so impressed with how sophisticated the generations coming up under me are. And, I'm not that much older, but like these kinds of conversations were not happening when I was in my 30s or 20s. They just weren't. This kind of level of the fulsomeness of it, the mixture of intellectual and spiritual and sexual and racial, cultural, historical, pedagogical, the deep thoughtfulness that went into every single person who spoke tonight is a really beautiful sign of the times, so you're not going to hear me grumbling about kids these days.
Yeah, Gen Z is like paving the way for us. Thank God, for real.
Seriously.
Just grateful to be in this space with y'all and encouraging people to stay in connection. I love the chat of people being like, I want to, be in touch and reach out to each other on Instagram, make those connections then last in real life. And I think, as was echoed many times today, our relationships and community building and movement building is truly the core of our emotional, spiritual, political longevity, and making sure to, get out of the kind of modern capitalist isolation that we often find ourselves forced into. So doing that as much as possible to sustain your wellness, your joy, and our visions for a ceasefire and a truly, truly, truly free, liberated Palestine.
All right, I'm going to go finish a final. Love y'all. It was so good to connect.
And big thank you to Sim as well for all of the lectures. Under duress.
Sending all the blessings to you. Hope you feel better very soon.
I'll do a Misha Berach for you.
For real.
Thank you. Has everybody gone? Okay, I'm going to end the stream. Thank you all so much for being here.
Thanks, everyone. Good night.
Thank y'all. Good night.
Take care.
Happy Hanukkah.
Bye.